I pulled my silver flash drive from the library computer, and the school's IT director snapped, "Step away from the terminal." I froze in place, my fingers still hovering in the air. The plastic of the drive was warm against my palm. I looked at Mr. Carter. He wasn't doing his usual annoyed tech guy routine. His face was completely drained of color. He looked like he was watching a bomb tick down to zero. "Why?" I asked. My voice sounded thin and entirely too loud in the quiet of the media center. It was 7:42 a.m. Tuesday, Westbridge High in Portland. The air smelled like old paper and industrial floor cleaner. I was just trying to print out a 12-page AP history paper on the Cold War. Mr. Harrison was strict about hard copies, and he wanted them in full color because I had included maps of the Soviet bloc. I had plugged my drive into workstation number 14. It sat right next to a laminated sign taped to the desk. Staff use only after 7:30 a.m. I usually ignore those rules because the staff computers are the only ones hardwired to the high-yield color printer. But the second I pulled my drive out, Mr. Carter had materialized from behind the reference stacks looking like he had seen a ghost. He stared at the blinking tower PC for a solid 10 seconds. He didn't look at me. He looked at the black screen, which was now scrolling lines of white text I didn't understand. He grabbed the heavy walkie-talkie clipped to his belt. "Code yellow in the media center. Terminal 14 is compromised," he barked. My stomach dropped into my knees. Within 90 seconds, the heavy double doors of the library swung open with a violent thud. Principal Miller came first. He was breathing heavy, his tie slightly crooked. Behind him were the two campus security guards, and right behind them, Officer Davies. She was the actual Portland police liaison assigned to our school. She had her hand resting on her utility belt, not on her gun, but close enough to make my heart hammer against my ribs. The few kids cramming for midterms stopped highlighting their textbooks. The librarian, Mrs. Gable, peeked over her reading glasses, her face completely pale. A kid named Jordan, who sat behind me in AP English, stage whispered, "Dude, what did she download?" I swallowed hard, suddenly hyper-aware of my own breathing. "I just printed my essay," I stammered, my voice cracking embarrassingly loud. Principal Miller treated me to a glare usually reserved for kids caught pulling the fire alarm during finals. "Why were you at this specific terminal?" he demanded. I pointed a shaky finger at the massive Xerox machine across the room. "Because it's the only one connected to the color printer?" I offered, stating the obvious. Nobody chuckled. The silence in the room became absolutely suffocating. Officer Davies gestured toward the door. "Walk with us." They marched me down the main corridor like a high-profile fugitive. First period hadn't officially started, so the halls were packed. Hundreds of kids backed up against the lockers to let us pass. My phone vibrated endlessly in my pocket, Snapchat notifications blowing up. Texts from my best friend Zoe were flooding my lock screen, buzzing against my thigh. When we reached the administrative wing, they bypassed the main office entirely and shoved me into a windowless conference room usually used for teacher evaluations. The air conditioning was freezing in there. A single fluorescent bulb hummed overhead, making the white cinder block walls look like a hospital cell. They left me sweating in there for 45 excruciating minutes. I watched the second hand on the cheap wall clock. I couldn't check my phone. Principal Miller had confiscated it the moment I sat down. Finally, a guy I had never seen before walked in. He wasn't a teacher. He wasn't a uniformed cop. He wore a cheap gray suit and carried a thick metal clipboard. He locked the door behind him with a heavy metallic click and sat across the long fake wood table. He didn't introduce himself. He just stared at me with zero emotion. "Do you understand what was running on workstation 14? He asked. His voice was completely flat. "Microsoft Word?" I guessed, right on the verge of tears. He unclipped a printed spreadsheet from his board and slammed it on the table. It had my student ID number highlighted in neon yellow at the top, followed by a dense list of IP addresses and timestamps. "That terminal was an isolated honeypot," he stated coldly. "We've been tracking a malicious keylogger wiping grades from the district server for 3 weeks." I stared at him, my brain completely short-circuiting. "A what? I don't even know how to code," I protested, gripping the edges of my chair. "You removed the physical drive," he countered, pointing a pen at me, which triggered the firewall shutdown. They didn't expel me on the spot, but they confiscated my drive, bagged it in actual plastic evidence tape, and sent me back to third period with a security escort. By lunch, I was a total pariah. Everyone knew. The cafeteria was a sea of whispers that stopped the second I walked past. I bought a tray of terrible food just to have something to hold and went to the back corner. Zoe slid into the plastic booth next to me. She didn't sit across from me like usual. She slid in right next to me, pressing her tray against mine, boxing me in. "Why did you use Terminal 14? She hissed, looking over her shoulder. "I just needed a color map of Soviet Russia," I groaned, picking at my soggy tater tots. "Why is everyone treating me like I hacked the Pentagon?" Zoe looked around nervously. Her eyes were darting to the tables nearby. "You don't get it," she whispered. "Someone changed 70 seniors' transcripts last night. They left a backdoor program running on that specific computer to finish the wipe. They wanted someone dumb enough to use the restricted staff computer this morning to trigger the failsafe and take the blame." My blood ran ice cold. I wasn't the mastermind. I was the scapegoat. And the sickest part? The realization hit me so hard I actually dropped my plastic fork. The silver flash drive the IT guy confiscated from me wasn't even mine. Mine had a tiny chip on the plastic casing. My cat, Barnaby, had chewed on it 3 months ago. I rubbed my thumb over that little dent every time I used it. It was a nervous habit. The one I pulled out of the computer this morning, the one I handed to the guy in the gray suit, the one sealed in an evidence bag was flawless, completely smooth. The real hacker had swapped our drives while I was at the printer waiting for my 12 pages to spit out. I was gone for maybe 40 seconds, and they were still walking the halls of Westbridge High. "Zoe," I said, my voice dropping to a harsh whisper. "The drive they took. It wasn't mine." She stopped chewing. "What do you mean it wasn't yours? You brought it from home." "I brought mine from home. Someone swapped it while I was grabbing my papers." Zoe stared at me. Her expression shifted. The panic in her eyes faded into something colder. Doubt. "Are you serious right now?" she asked. The edge in her voice made me flinch. "Yes. My drive has a bite mark on it. The one I gave them didn't. Someone set me up." Zoe slowly put her milk down. She pulled her phone out of her pocket and slid it across the table toward me. The screen was lit up. It was a group chat with about 50 seniors in it. The chat was moving fast, but she scrolled up to a screenshot someone had forwarded. It was an anonymous email sent to the entire senior class list just 5 minutes ago. The subject line was just a smiley face. The body read, "Thanks to our girl for taking the fall fall this morning. Payment processed. Enjoy the new GPAs. I stared at the screen. The dull roar of the cafeteria around me seemed to turn into white noise. Payment processed. Zoe read aloud, looking at me sideways. She pulled the phone back. Did you need money for college that badly? Zoe, no, I didn't do this. They found it in your hand, she said, her voice dropping. You used the staff terminal. You never used the staff terminal. And now everyone thinks you sold out the grading system for a payout. I didn't, I argued, but my voice felt entirely too weak. Who was in the library this morning? Think. You were there at 7:30, right? You texted me you were going early to secure our usual table. Zoe looked away. She picked up her tray, avoiding my eyes. I wasn't in the library. Yes, you were. I have the text. I said I wasn't there. She snapped. It was too loud. A few kids at the next table turned to look at us. Zoe lowered her voice, leaning in close. Look, if you're going down for this, don't try to drag me into your mess just because you got sloppy. She stood up and walked away. She didn't look back once. I sat alone in the booth. My best friend of 4 years had just cut me loose over an anonymous email. I pulled my own phone out, my hands shaking. I opened the school's online portal to check my own transcript. Maybe if I showed them mine hadn't changed, they'd realize I had no motive. I typed in my ID and password. Error. Account suspended. Please contact administration. A shadow fell over my table. I looked up. It was Mr. Harrison, my AP history teacher. He didn't look angry. He looked deeply, uncomfortably disappointed. The principal wants to see you again, he said quietly. Bring your things, all of them. I grabbed my backpack off the sticky linoleum floor. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely manage the plastic buckle. Mr. Harrison didn't offer to help. He just stood there, his arms crossed over his ugly corduroy jacket, waiting. I shoved my binder and my half-empty water bottle into the main compartment and zipped it shut. I didn't look at the other tables. I could feel the weight of 100 pairs of eyes on me, but the cafeteria was dead silent, the kind of silence that rings in your ears. Mr. Harrison, I swear, I started, my voice barely a whisper. Not here, he cut me off. His tone wasn't mean, but it was hollow. That hurt worse. I had a 98 inches his class. I stayed after school on Thursdays to help him organize the Model UN archives. He was supposed to be the teacher who knew me, who knew I wasn't capable of pulling off a district-wide cybercrime. We walked out of the cafeteria and down the long C-wing corridor. The bell hadn't rung yet, so the halls were empty. My sneakers squeaked on the polished floor. Every step felt like walking to my own funeral. This time, we didn't go to the windowless evaluation room. Mr. Harrison led me straight to the main administrative suite. The receptionist, Mrs. Higgins, didn't give me her usual warm smile. She looked down at her keyboard the second I walked in. Mr. Harrison pointed toward Principal Miller's office, the big one with the frosted glass door. I pushed the door open. My mom was sitting in one of the hard leather chairs facing the desk. She was still wearing her dark blue scrubs from her morning shift at the clinic. She looked exhausted, her hair pulled back in a messy clip, but the moment she saw me, her posture went rigid. Mom, I choked out. Sit down, Principal Miller said. He was sitting behind his massive oak desk. To his right stood Officer Davies, the police liaison. To his left was the guy in the gray suit with the metal clipboard. I took the empty chair next to my mom. She immediately reached over and grabbed my hand. Her fingers were freezing. We called your mother because the situation has escalated past a simple disciplinary issue, Principal Miller began. He pushed a manila folder across his desk. It stopped right in front of me. 10 minutes ago, an email was sent from a spoofed address to the entire senior class, thanking you for taking the fall and confirming that a payment was processed. I saw it, I said, my voice shaking. Zoe showed me in the cafeteria, but I didn't send it. I didn't get paid. I don't even know what happened. The guy in the gray suit finally introduced himself. My name is Sterling. I'm an independent network security auditor contracted by the school board. We were brought in last month when the district noticed minor discrepancies in the attendance logs. Turns out that was just a test run. What happened last night was a massive, coordinated breach. He leaned forward, placing both hands flat on the desk. Someone deployed a customized remote access Trojan on the school's mainframe. They bypassed the two-factor authentication on the registrar's account, entered the secure database, and manually altered the cumulative GPAs of 72 graduating seniors. They bumped B's to A's. They erased failed classes. They completely rewrote the academic standing of the top 20% of the senior class. My mom squeezed my hand so hard it hurt. And you think my daughter did this? She's 17. She panics when our home Wi-Fi router needs to be reset. She doesn't know how to code. We don't think she coded it. Officer Davies stepped in, her voice calm but heavy with authority. We think she was the physical mule. The internal network at Westbridge is air-gapped from the outside internet for administrative functions. You can't hack it from a basement in Russia. You have to physically plug a payload into a hardwired staff terminal to create a backdoor. Terminal 14, Sterling added. The one your daughter used at 7:42 this morning. The exact terminal where we caught her pulling a flash drive that was actively executing a script to wipe the audit logs. It was a history paper, I yelled, the tears finally spilling over. I was printing a paper on the Cold War. The drive you took from me wasn't mine. Someone swapped it while I was grabbing my pages from the printer. Principal Miller sighed heavily, pinching the bridge of his nose. A swap. In the 30 seconds you were supposedly turned around. Yes. I looked at my mom, pleading with my eyes. Mom, you know my silver drive? The one Barnaby chewed on? It has a dent in the plastic. My mom frowned, thinking. The metal one? Yes. The cat bit it over the summer. She looked up at the principal. Check the drive you confiscated. If it doesn't have a bite mark, it's not hers. Sterling didn't even blink. The drive in evidence is a standard 64 gigabyte silver Kingston drive. No bite marks. Flawless condition. Which tells me she bought a new one, or was given a new one by her accomplices, specifically for this drop. That's a massive assumption. My mom snapped, her protective instincts finally overriding her shock. Her voice raised an octave. You have zero proof she knew what was on that drive. You said it yourself. She's the mule. If she was set up, of course the drive wouldn't have a bite mark on it. Ma'am, Officer Davies said gently. She used a restricted computer. She bypassed the warning sign, and we have the physical hardware in her possession at the exact moment the firewall tripped. The amount of damage done to the district's integrity. We're looking at federal wire fraud and felony computer tampering. This isn't detention. This is juvenile detention. The room spun. The walls felt like they were shrinking. Felony. Juvenile detention. I was trying to get into an out-of-state college. I was supposed to take my SATs next month. We are officially suspending her pending a full expulsion hearing, Principal Miller said, tapping the manila folder. Furthermore, the police will be taking taking over the criminal investigation. I need your phone, Officer Davies said, holding out her hand. I froze. Right now, she added. If you refuse, we'll hold you here while a judge signs a warrant, and we'll take it anyway. My mom looked at me. Give it to her. You have nothing to hide. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. The screen lit up. 3 new messages from Zoe. I hadn't read them yet. I handed the phone across the desk. Password, Sterling demanded. 101408. I mumbled. Sterling unlocked it and immediately opened my texts. He didn't scroll far. He stopped, his eyebrows raising just a fraction of an inch. He turned the screen around and placed it on the desk so my mom and Principal Miller could see. I leaned forward. It was the thread with Zoe. The last 3 messages, the ones she sent right after she walked away from me in the cafeteria, were glaring back at me in bright blue bubbles. Zoe, you promised me my name wouldn't come up. Zoe, if you tell them I was in the library this morning, I'm showing them the Venmo history. Zoe, delete this. My mouth fell open. The blood roared in my ears. What Venmo history? My mom asked, her voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. She turned to me, her eyes wide with betrayal. What is she talking about? Nothing! I panicked, grabbing the edge of the desk. I haven't Venmo'd Zoe in weeks, just for iced coffee. She's lying. She's trying to frame me. Right, Sterling said dryly. First, the mysterious hacker swapped your drive. Now your best friend is framing you via text. That's a lot of bad luck for one Tuesday. Wait, I said, my brain racing, trying to put the pieces together. The cafeteria, the conversation, Zoe's weirdly specific knowledge. Wait, check the email. The anonymous email that went out to the school. Sterling frowned but pulled out his tablet. What about it? Read exactly what it says, I demanded. He glanced at the screen. Thanks to our girl for taking the fall this morning. Payment processed. Enjoy the new GPAs. It doesn't say a number, I said, my heart hammering against my ribs. It just says the new GPAs. So? Principal Miller asked. In the cafeteria, before that email even went out, Zoe told me someone changed 70 seniors' transcripts. She said 70. I pointed at Sterling. You just said 72. But Zoe knew the rough number. How did she know that? The school hasn't released a statement. The rumor mill didn't have the details yet. How did my best friend know exactly how many grades were wiped unless she was involved? The room went quiet for a few seconds. Officer Davies looked at Sterling. Sterling looked back at the phone, reading Zoe's texts again. It's a discrepancy, Officer Davies admitted quietly. But it's not proof. Kids talk fast. Rumors spread faster. She told me not to tell you she was in the library at 7:30. I pushed, desperate to keep the crack in their theory open. Check the library cameras, the one over the front desk. You'll see her walk in. The library cameras have been offline since Friday, Principal Miller said flatly. Scheduled maintenance. I felt the last bit of hope drain out of me. Scheduled maintenance. Of course, whoever planned this knew the blind spots. They knew the schedule. They knew I was an AP history nerd who would ignore the staff-only sign to print a color map. Mom, I whispered. You have to believe me. My mom stared at the phone on the desk. She looked at Zoe's texts. Then she looked at me. I could see the battle happening in her head. She wanted to believe me. She was my mother, but the evidence was suffocating. Don't say another word, my mom said finally. She stood up, her chair scraping harshly against the floor. She didn't look at the principal. She looked straight at Officer Davies. We are leaving. You have her phone. You have the flash drive. If you want anything else, you can call our lawyer. Mrs. Hayes, Principal Miller started. I said we're leaving. My mom grabbed my arm, her grip tight and unyielding. Get your bag. I slung my backpack over my shoulder. As I turned to the door, Sterling spoke up, his voice losing that flat, robotic edge for the first time. Miss Hayes, he said to me. I stopped. A backdoor program isn't just a sledgehammer. It's a two-way street. It lets them in, but it also sends a ping back to the host. If we find the origin ping on your home IP address, the lawyer won't matter. You won't, I said, meeting his eyes, because I didn't do it. I walked out of the office. The reception area was full now. First period was over, and the office runners were dropping off attendance sheets. A dozen kids stopped and stared as my mom practically dragged me out the front doors of the school and into the crisp Portland air. We walked to her Subaru in the visitor parking lot. She unlocked it with the fob, getting in and slamming her door. I got in the passenger seat and threw my bag in the back. She didn't start the car. She just gripped the steering wheel, her knuckles turning white. She stared straight out the windshield at the brick facade of Westbridge High. Mom, I started. How much? She asked. Her voice was terrifyingly calm. What? How much did they pay you? She turned to look at me, and I saw tears pooling in the corners of her eyes. Because if we have to hire a defense attorney, it's going to cost us everything we have saved. So tell me right now, did you do this for college money? Did you do this because I was stressing about the tuition? No, I shouted, the frustration finally breaking me. I didn't do it. Why won't you believe me? Because of the Venmo texts, she yelled back, hitting the steering wheel with the heel of her hand. Because Zoe is your best friend, and she just implicated you to the police. She's setting me up. Why would she do that? I don't know, I screamed, burying my face in my hands. I don't know. We sat in the car for 5 minutes in total silence. The only sound was the faint hum of traffic from the main road and the sound of my own ragged breathing. Finally, my mom reached forward and turned the key. The engine rumbled to life. We're going home, she said, putting the car in reverse. I'm calling Uncle David. He knows a lawyer who handles juvenile cases. Mom, wait, I looked up, wiping my face. I need my laptop. Your laptop is at home, and you're not touching it. If the police come with a warrant, I want it exactly as it was. No, I mean, if Zoe set me up, I need to know why. I stared out the window as we pulled out of the parking lot. Zoe doesn't code either. She barely passes math. If she's involved, she's a mule too. Or she's covering for whoever really built that program. My mom didn't answer. She just drove, her jaw set tight. I leaned my head against the cold glass of the window. I didn't have my phone. I didn't have my flash drive. I had been expelled, branded a felon, and abandoned by my best friend before second period even started. But I knew one thing. Zoe had slipped. She knew the number was 70, and she sent those texts specifically when she knew the police would be looking at my phone. It wasn't just a setup. It was a perfectly executed burn. She wanted me completely isolated. As we pulled up to our small house, I noticed something sitting on the front porch. A plain manila envelope resting right on the welcome mat. My mom parked in the driveway and frowned. Did you order something? No, I said, a cold dread washing over me. I got out of the car and walked up the concrete path. The envelope was sealed. There was no stamp, no address, no name, just a thick, heavy package sitting on the rough bristles of the mat. I picked it up. It felt like there was a small book inside, or a stack of paper. paper, and something hard, pressing against the paper edge. I peeled back the metal clasp and looked inside. Sitting on top of a thick stack of printed bank statements was a silver Kingston flash drive. It had a tiny bite mark on the plastic casing. I traced my thumb over the jagged little groove in the metal. It was exactly where Barnaby's bottom canine had clamped down. It was my drive, the one I brought to school this morning. My mom slammed her car door and marched up the walkway. "What is that?" she demanded. I couldn't speak. I just held out the silver rectangle. She snatched it. She looked at the bite mark, then down into the open envelope in my other hand. She reached in and pulled out the thick stack of papers. "These are bank statements," she said, her voice dropping to a harsh whisper. She flipped to the first page. I leaned in. The logo at the top left was Pacific Northwest Credit Union. It was the local branch where my mom had helped me open a student checking account when I got my summer job at the movie theater. My name was printed clearly at the top, Hannah Hayes. Halfway down the page, a single line was highlighted in neon yellow marker. Incoming wire transfer. Educational Solutions, LLC. Amount, $12,500. Date, May 5. Time, 8:14 a.m. Mom, I breathed, my chest tightening so hard I couldn't get a full breath. I didn't do this. I swear to God. I don't even know what Educational Solutions, LLC is. 8:14, my mom read aloud. That was right after they pulled you into the conference room, while you were sitting there with the principal. The frame job was absolute. The hacker didn't just want me to take the blame, they wanted a paper trail so undeniable that no lawyer could fight it. But why give the real drive back? I asked, staring at the little piece of metal in her hand. If the police have the fake one, why return mine? They could have just thrown it in the river. My mom stared at the statement. The doubt that had been in her eyes in the principal's office was completely gone. She was a single mom who worked 12-hour shifts at a busy clinic. She dealt with liars, addicts, and terrified patients all day. She knew what panic looked like, and she knew what a setup looked like. This was too neat. Because someone is playing a game, she said grimly. She shoved the papers back into the envelope and grabbed my arm. Get inside, now. We practically ran into the house. She locked the deadbolt behind us and threw the envelope on the kitchen island. Don't touch your laptop, she ordered. She walked down the hall to the linen closet and dug around on the top shelf. She came back carrying a bulky, 5-year-old Dell laptop she used to use for nursing school. It took 3 minutes just to boot up. Mom, you said we shouldn't touch it if the police come with a warrant. If the police come with a warrant, they're going to find a sudden $12,000 deposit in your checking account, she snapped, typing in her old password. We are already past the point of looking innocent. We need to know what's on this drive. She clicked the Wi-Fi icon in the bottom right corner and manually disabled the internet connection, air-gapped, just like the school server. She held out her hand. I dropped the chewed silver drive into her palm. She plugged it into the USB port. The computer chimed. A window popped up on the screen. There was only one folder on the drive. It was titled Insurance. Zip. Extract it, I said, my heart pounding in my ears. She double-clicked the file. A progress bar flashed for a second, and then a new folder opened. Inside were 3 files, 2 JPEGs and 1 text document. Mom clicked the first JPEG. It was a screenshot from a security camera. The angle was high up, looking down at the library's media center. The timestamp in the corner read time 7:15 and 2 seconds a.m. today. Principal Miller said the cameras were down for scheduled maintenance, I said. Someone lied to him, Mom replied softly. The picture was crystal clear. It showed workstation 14, and sitting at the desk, illuminated by the harsh glow of the monitor, was Zoe. She was holding a flawless silver flash drive, plugging it into the tower. I felt physically sick. Seeing the text messages in the principal's office was one thing. Seeing her actually doing it, planting the very thing that would ruin my life, made my stomach violently reject the terrible school lunch I'd eaten. Mom clicked the second JPEG. It was another security camera angle, this one from the narrow hallway behind the administrative suite. The timestamp was time 7:22 a.m. Zoe was standing by the emergency exit doors. She wasn't alone. Standing next to her, handing her a thick manila envelope, the exact same kind that had just been left on our porch, was Mr. Carter, the school's IT director. The IT guy, my mom said, leaning closer to the screen. He's the one who caught me, I said, the pieces violently snapping into place. He came out from behind the bookshelves exactly when I pulled my drive out. He called the code yellow immediately. He didn't even check the computer first. He just knew. He didn't catch you, Mom said, her voice laced with disgust. He used you. She clicked the text document. It opened in Notepad. It was a chat transcript. No phone numbers, just handles. Admin, 1 times, and times Z. Admin 1. Auditor is running the deep scan tomorrow at 9 a.m. We need the wipe finished before then. Z. I'm not doing it. He's already suspicious. Admin 1. You already did the hard part. The script is loaded. You just need to trigger the failsafe to execute the wipe and crash the firewall. Z. Get someone else. I got the grades changed. You got paid. I'm out. Admin 1. If they find the back door, they trace it to the IP I used at your house. We both go down. Find a mule. Someone who has a reason to use that printer. Swap the drives. Trigger the alarm. Z. Who? Admin 1. Your shadow. She prints those massive history papers every week. I stopped reading. Your shadow. That's what people called me, because I was always quietly following Zoe around. I was the reliable one, the boring one. He orchestrated the whole thing, I said, my voice hollow. Mr. Carter. The district hired that auditor, Sterling, to look into the grade system. Carter panicked. He needed to destroy the evidence, but he needed a scapegoat so Sterling would stop looking. And Zoe sold you out to save herself. Mom finished. She closed the laptop. The screen went black. Okay, Mom said, taking a deep breath. She was going into full crisis management mode. We have the proof, we have the photos and the chat logs. We take this straight to the police station. We bypass the school entirely. Wait, I said. If Carter has admin access to the school cameras and the network, couldn't he just delete the originals? This is just a copy on a flash drive. A good lawyer could say we photoshopped it to frame Zoe. Mom froze, her hand hovering over the laptop lid. She knew I was right. In a digital he said, she said, the guy with the IT degree wins against the 17-year-old girl with a sudden $12,000 deposit in her bank account. Then why give this to us? Mom asked, gesturing to the drive. If this proves he did it, why drop it on our porch? Before I could answer, the doorbell rang. It wasn't a normal ring. It was a sharp, rapid, 3-burst press. Someone was leaning on the button. Mom and I stared at each other. The house was dead quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator. I crept out of the kitchen and pressed my back against the wall in the hallway, leaning over just enough to peek through the narrow narrow side window next to the front door. A black Ford sedan was parked in our driveway, blocking my mom's Subaru. Standing on the porch, wearing the exact same cheap gray suit he had on in the principal's office, was Sterling, the auditor. He wasn't holding his metal clipboard anymore. He was holding his cell phone, and he looked incredibly tense. He knocked on the wood of the door, heavy and loud. "Mrs. Hayes," his voice came through the thick wood, muffled but clear. "I know you're in there. Your car is here." Mom stepped up quietly behind me. "I'm not here on behalf of the school," Sterling said. He leaned closer to the door crack. "And I'm not here with the police. I need to talk to you about Martin Carter." My breath caught in my throat. I looked at my mom. She pressed her lips into a thin line, making a silent decision. She reached out and unlocked the deadbolt. She opened the door just a few inches, keeping her foot firmly planted against the base. "You have 2 minutes," my mom said coldly, "and you stay on the porch." Sterling let out a breath that sounded like relief. "The school's network just went completely dark," he said, skipping any kind of greeting. "A secondary script triggered an hour ago. It didn't just wipe the audit logs. It wiped everything. Teacher emails, financial records, HR files. The servers are bricked." "That sounds like a you problem," Mom said. "It is," Sterling agreed quickly. "But before it went dark, I ran a physical trace on the honeypot terminal your daughter used, the one I set up to catch the leak." He looked right at me through the crack in the door. "The back door wasn't planted this morning," Sterling said. "It was planted 3 days ago, by an administrator account." "We know," I said, unable to stop myself. Sterling blinked, surprised. "You know?" Mom opened the door a little wider. "Someone just left a package on our porch. Bank statements showing a massive wire transfer into Hannah's account, and a flash drive with security footage of Zoe and the IT director." Sterling's face went completely pale. It was the first time I'd seen him show any real emotion. "They gave you the insurance file?" "Yes," Mom said cautiously. "Why?" "Because Carter isn't the mastermind," Sterling said, his voice dropping. "Carter is a mid-level tech guy with a gambling problem. I found his deleted emails 30 minutes ago. He was taking orders from someone else, someone who paid him to alter the grades, and then paid him to burn the system down when I started asking questions." Sterling ran a hand through his hair, looking back over his shoulder at the empty street. "The person who left that package on your porch didn't do it to help you," Sterling said, turning back to us. "They did it to make you the murder weapon. If you take that drive to the police, Carter gets arrested. Zoe gets arrested. The trail stops with them. And the person who actually paid for the grade changes gets away clean," I realized out loud. "Exactly," Sterling said, "which means whoever dropped that package knows where you live. And they are relying on you panicking and going straight to the cops." "I times am times going to the cops," Mom said fiercely. "I don't care about your investigation. I care about my daughter's future. If this clears her name, we're going." "It won't clear her," Sterling countered, his tone desperate. "Look at the bank statement. $12,000. If you hand that over, the police will just think Hannah was part of the ring, got cold feet, and rolled on Carter for a plea deal. She'll still face charges." He took a step closer to the door. "Let me see the drive," he said. "If I can reverse engineer the chat logs, I can find the IP address of the person Carter was talking to, the real buyer. It's the only way to prove Hannah was completely blind to all of this." Mom didn't move. She just stared at him. "Why should I trust you? 2 hours ago, you were ready to throw her in juvenile detention." "Because my reputation is on the line," Sterling said bluntly. "I was hired to secure that network, and it just burned to the ground under my watch. If I don't find the buyer, my career is over. We have a mutual interest in the truth right now." My phone, sitting on the console table in the hallway where Mom had dumped my bag, suddenly vibrated. I turned around. It was buzzing angrily against the wood. I walked over and picked it up. Unknown number. I answered it, putting it on speaker so my mom and Sterling could hear. "Hello?" I said. There was a split second of static, and then a voice spoke. It was digitally altered, dropped an octave so it sounded like a slow, metallic drawl. "Did you look at the photos, Hannah?" I froze. Sterling stepped entirely into the house, quietly pushing the door shut behind him. "Who is this?" I asked, my voice shaking. "Someone who appreciates a clean slate," the voice said. "Take the drive to Officer Davies. Tell her you found it in Zoe's locker. Do that, and the wire transfer in your bank account stays there. A little college bonus for your trouble. The school kicks out Carter, and you get your life back." "I'm not lying to the police," I said. "You won't be lying," the voice replied smoothly. "You'll be delivering the truth. Carter did it. Zoe helped. You're just the brave citizen turning them in. And if I don't?" I asked. A low, distorted chuckle came through the speaker. "Then, at 3 p.m. today, I forward the chat logs from Carter's computer directly to the police, but I'll edit them first. I'll make sure Times admin 1 times looks a lot like your IP address, and I'll let them know about the 12 grand you just received. You have 2 hours, Hannah. Be smart." The line clicked dead. I lowered the phone. The house was painfully silent again. Sterling looked at his watch. It was 1:05 p.m. "He's monitoring Carter's system," Sterling said, his mind working a mile a minute. "He knows Carter kept insurance. He's using you to execute the final stage of the cover-up." "We can't go to the police," Mom said, looking physically sick. "If he edits the logs, it's her word against digital evidence. Again, we need the real buyer's identity," Sterling said. He looked at me. "Hannah, grab the laptop. We're going to my office." I didn't move right away. I looked at my mom. She gave a single tight nod. I grabbed the heavy, thick Dell laptop off the kitchen counter and hugged it to my chest like it was a bulletproof vest. Mom grabbed her car keys off the hook by the door. We didn't say a word to each other as we walked out, leaving the manila envelope and the bank statements sitting on the island. Sterling was already in his Ford. Mom put her Subaru in gear and we followed him out of our subdivision. The silence in the car was suffocating. I kept staring at the digital clock on the dashboard. It was 1:12 p.m. The voice on the phone had given us until 3 p.m., less than 2 hours before he sent the edited logs to the police and cemented my life as a convicted felon. Mom reached out and tapped the touchscreen on her dashboard, pulling up her contacts. She hit a name, Uncle David. It rang 3 times before he picked up. His voice echoed through the car speakers. "Sarah? I'm in court in 20 minutes. What's up? I need you to listen to me and not interrupt," Mom said, her voice shaking but hard as iron. She laid out the last 4 hours in about 90 seconds. She didn't skip anything. The honeypot, the swapped drive, the expulsion, the bank statements, the 12 grand, the drop on the porch, the phone call. There was a long, terrible silence on the other end of the line. I could hear traffic noise behind him. "David?" Mom prompted. "Where are you right now?" he asked. His lawyer voice was gone. He just sounded scared, following the district's IT auditor to his office to try and trace the real IP address. "Turn the car around," David said immediately. Sarah, do not go to a secondary location with a guy who is actively involved in the breached system. You are holding a stolen device. And worse, Hannah is holding $12,500 of wire fraud in a federally insured bank account. She didn't ask for the money. It doesn't matter, David snapped. Any transfer over $10,000 triggers an automatic suspicious activity report under the Bank Secrecy Act. The bank has already flagged it. The feds probably already have the alert in a queue. If you walk into a police station with a flash drive that some anonymous voice told you to bring in, they won't view you as a victim. They'll view you as a co-conspirator trying to cut a deal. So what do we do? I asked, leaning forward, my heart hammering against my ribs. You do nothing. You go home. You do not touch the money. You do not talk to the police without me physically in the room. And you definitely do not let some private IT contractor play amateur detective with the only piece of evidence that proves Hannah was framed. If we do nothing, Mom said, her voice rising, the guy edits the logs at 3 o'clock and sends them to the cops. They'll arrest her today. If they arrest her, I'll bail her out, David said firmly. But if you tamper with evidence, or if this Sterling guy accidentally wipes the metadata while trying to be a hero, I can't save her in court. Sarah, I'm serious. Pull the car over. Mom looked at me. I looked back at her. I thought about the sheer panic in Mr. Carter's eyes this morning. I thought about Zoe, my best friend since the 8th grade, sliding her tray next to mine and lying to my face. I thought about the bite mark on the drive. If I get arrested, I said quietly, my college acceptance is gone. They revoke it automatically for felony charges. Even if I get cleared in a year, I lose everything. Mom's grip on the steering wheel tightened until her knuckles were stark white. She stared at the bumper of Sterling's Ford in front of us. I'll call you back, David, she said, and hit the big red button on the screen to end the call. We didn't turn around. Sterling's office wasn't some high-tech cybersecurity bunker downtown. It was in the basement of the district's administrative annex, building an old, repurposed elementary school from the 70s that smelled like floor wax and damp brick. We followed him down a flight of concrete stairs and through a heavy fire door. His workspace was a converted storage room. There were no windows. 3 massive server racks hummed loudly against the back wall, generating a wave of dry heat. His desk was a folding table covered in empty energy drink cans, tangled Ethernet cables, and 4 different monitors. He locked the door behind us. Sit, he said, pointing to a single plastic chair. Mom stood behind it. I sat down, clutching the Dell laptop. Give me the drive, he said, holding out his hand. I hesitated, looking up at Mom. Uncle David's warning was echoing in my head. If this guy accidentally wipes the metadata, I can't save her. Do you know what you're doing? Mom asked, stepping between me and Sterling. Because if you ruin this file, she goes to prison. Not you. I've been auditing networks for 15 years, Sterling said, his eyes dark and exhausted. Carter is a sloppy amateur who got greedy. He used a commercial wiping tool and didn't even bother to scrub the registry keys on his local machine. If he saved the chat logs as an insurance policy, he didn't just screenshot them. He exported the raw data. The metadata will still be attached. Mom slowly nodded. I handed him the silver drive. He didn't plug it into his main rig. He pulled a thick, rugged-looking laptop out of a Pelican case on the floor. It wasn't connected to anything. Air-gapped sandpit, he muttered, mostly to himself. He slid the drive in. I watched his screens. He didn't open the files the way Mom and I had. He opened a command terminal, a black box with white text, and started typing so fast the keys blurred. Strings of code cascaded down the screen. Okay, Sterling said, his eyes darting back and forth. There's the zip file. Extracting the text document. I'm bypassing the text viewer and opening the file in a hex editor. The screen filled with an absolute mess of numbers and letters. It meant nothing to me. When Carter and the buyer communicated, they didn't use iMessage or standard email, Sterling explained, pointing a pen at a block of numbers. Carter's smart enough to know the district server logs all inbound traffic, so they used a peer-to-peer encrypted chat client, probably something web-based. But when Carter exported the transcript to save his own skin, the export tool captured the session data, including the routing IPs. He typed another command. The wall of text shifted, filtering down to just 3 lines. Got you, Sterling whispered. He highlighted a string of numbers, 192.168 and so on. Is that the buyer? I asked, my mouth dry. That's the local IP, yeah, but that doesn't help us. That just tells us they were on a router. I need the public IP to trace the physical location. He typed furiously for another 30 seconds. A new number popped up. Sterling stared at it. He didn't celebrate. He just frowned, leaning closer to the monitor. What? Mom demanded. Did you find it? I found the IP, Sterling said slowly, but I know this IP. From where? Sterling turned his chair around to face us. It's not a residential address. It's not a coffee shop. It's not a VPN server in Russia. He pointed at the screen. That IP address belongs to Westbridge High School, specifically the Secure Administrative Subnetwork. The room felt like it dropped 10 degrees. What does that mean? I asked, my voice barely working. It means the buyer wasn't a parent sitting at home or a kid hacking from their bedroom, Sterling said, the realization washing over his face in real time. The person who paid Carter $12,000 to change the grades was sitting inside the school building when they did it, on an administrative computer. Another teacher? Mom asked, horrified. Or an administrator, Sterling said. He grabbed his mouse on his main desk, the one connected to the internet, and started typing again. The district has static IPs for every major office in the building. Principal, vice principal, counselors, attendants. Give me a second. I have the directory. He pulled up a massive spreadsheet on his right monitor. He hit Ctrl+F and pasted the IP address he'd pulled from the chat log. The cursor jumped halfway down the page, the row highlighted in blue. Sterling stopped breathing. I stood up from the plastic chair and leaned over the desk to read the name attached to the IP address. Device assignment. Desktop terminal 01 at location. Guidance and College Counseling Center. Assigned user. Eleanor Gable. Mrs. Gable? I choked out. The librarian? She's not just the librarian, Mom said, her voice dropping into something cold and dangerous. She's the head of the scholarship committee for the senior class. My mind raced back to this morning. 7:42 a.m. The media center. When Carter had yelled code yellow, I had looked around the room. The kids studying for midterms had stopped, and Mrs. Gable had peeked over her reading glasses, her face completely pale. I thought she was scared of the police. She wasn't. She was watching her scapegoat trigger the trap she had built. Why would the librarian pay to change 70 kids' grades? Sterling asked, shaking his head. She doesn't have kids. She doesn't make that kind of money on a district salary to throw around 12 grand for a cover-up. She didn't pay for it out of her own pocket, Mom said. The pieces were locking together in her head. She looked at me. Hannah, the senior class list. Who got the biggest academic shifts this semester? Who suddenly jumped from the middle of the pack into the top tier? I thought about the rumors, the whispers in the hallway, Zoe's sudden confidence about getting into Oregon State despite failing chemistry twice. And then I remembered the anonymous email. Payment processed. Enjoy the new GPAs. It wasn't one person buying better grades, I said, the sickness in my stomach turning into a hard, burning anger. It was a syndicate. The parents paid her. Sterling looked at me, his eyes wide. Mrs. Gable runs the scholarship applications, I explained rapidly, pacing the small room. She knows exactly which kids are borderline. She knows which parents are desperate and which ones have money. She approached them. She charged them a premium, took a massive cut, and used the rest to pay off Carter to actually execute the hack in the system. And Zoe? Mom asked. Where does she fit in? Zoe works as Mrs. Gable's library aide 4th period, I said. It all made disgusting, perfect sense. Zoe got her grades changed as payment for being the middleman. She was the one who planted the backdoor program on the staff computer, so Carter wouldn't be caught on camera doing it. And when Sterling started auditing the network, they panicked. They needed a firewall crash to wipe the logs, and they needed someone to take the blame. Your shadow, Sterling murmured, quoting the chat log. I looked at the digital clock on his computer monitor. 1:52 p.m. We had an hour and 8 minutes left. We have the proof, Mom said, pointing at the air-gapped laptop. We have the IP. We have the chat logs. We have the motive. Print it. We are going to the police right now. No, Sterling said sharply. He stood up. If we go to the police with this, Gable will deny it. She'll say her terminal was spoofed. She's the librarian. She'll claim any student could have sat at her desk and used her computer, and she's the one who controls the money. If she senses we're closing in, she'll execute the edit on the logs and frame Hannah permanently. The police will see the 12 grand in Hannah's account and lock her up before they ever look at Gable. So what do we do? Mom yelled, finally losing her temper. Let her ruin my daughter's life? We need the money trail, Sterling said. He looked at me, his expression deadly serious. Hannah, the $12,000 wire transfer. The bank statement said it came from an LLC. What was the name? Educational Solutions LLC, I said instantly. The name was burned into my retinas. Sterling spun back to his keyboard. He opened a browser tab to the Oregon Secretary of State Business Registry. He typed in Times Educational Solutions LLC. The search spun for a second. 0 results found. It's an out-of-state shell, Sterling muttered. He switched to a national database aggregator. He typed it again. 3 results popped up. 2 in Delaware, 1 in Nevada. He clicked the Nevada registry. There, Sterling said, pointing at the screen. Registered agent. It's a blind trust, but look at the mailing address. It was a P.O. box in downtown Portland. Gable isn't a criminal mastermind, Sterling said, his voice speeding up as the adrenaline hit him. She's a high school librarian. If she set up a shell company to wash the bribe money from the parents, she used an online legal service, and she tied it to a local P.O. box so she could collect the physical bank cards. If we can prove she owns that P.O. box, we prove she owns the LLC that wired the money to Hannah to frame her. How do we prove she owns a P.O. box? I asked. The post office isn't going to just tell us. Mom stared at the screen. She reached into her purse and pulled out her phone. I don't need the post office, Mom said. I need someone who can legally subpoena a federal mailbox registry before 3 o'clock. She unlocked her phone and hit Uncle David's name again. It rang exactly once before he picked up. I already told you, David said, his voice hard. If you are still with that IT guy, you are compromising my ability to defend Hannah in a courtroom. David, shut up and listen, Mom snapped. She put him on speakerphone and set the device flat on Sterling's messy desk. The $12,000 came from a shell company in Nevada called Educational Solutions LLC. The registered agent points to a P.O. box right here in Portland. We know who set it up. It's the school librarian, Eleanor Gable. Okay, David said slowly, his tone shifting slightly as the lawyer part of his brain engaged. That's a theory. A good one, but it's a theory. It's not a theory. Sterling traced the IP address of the person who paid the IT director. The transaction happened from Gable's terminal in the guidance office. There was a heavy pause on the line. I could hear papers shuffling in the background on David's end. Sarah, David said, his voice dropping an octave, sounding exhausted. What are you asking me for? I need a subpoena, Mom said. I need you to compel the Postal Service or the Nevada Registry to hand over the name attached to that P.O. box or that LLC. I need proof it's Gable, and I need it before 3 o'clock. David let out a harsh, bitter laugh. Sarah, you've been watching too much television. A subpoena isn't a magic spell I can cast over the phone. I have to draft a motion, file it with a federal clerk, get it in front of a judge, convince the judge there's probable cause without admitting my niece is currently in possession of the stolen funds, and then serve that order to a federal agency. How long? Mom demanded. Best case scenario? 3 days. Worst case? 2 weeks. I cannot get you a federal subpoena in 45 minutes. It is legally and physically impossible. Mom stared at the phone. The color drained from her face. She looked at me, and for the first time since this nightmare started, I saw genuine, unfiltered defeat in her eyes. If we don't prove it by 3, I whispered, staring at the air-gapped laptop, he alters the logs. He frames me permanently. Who alters the logs? David asked sharply. Who are you talking about? Sterling leaned over the desk, speaking directly toward the phone. This is Sterling. The hacker who orchestrated the breach left an automated script running. It's a dead man's switch. At 15 hours, it's going to rewrite the server logs to point directly at Hannah's home IP address, and it's going to email a copy to the police. Then unplug your router at home, David said immediately. It won't matter, Sterling replied, his voice tight with frustration. The script isn't running from her house. It's running locally on a machine somewhere inside the school network. It's just going to spoof times her IP. It'll look like she did it, and with the money already in her account, the police won't dig deep enough to prove the spoof. Then you need to go to the police right now and surrender the drive, David argued. Tell them the truth. Tell them you're being blackmailed. We do that. We give them the murder weapon with Hannah's fingerprints all over it, Mom countered, her anger flaring again, and the voice on the phone told us exactly what would happen. If we go to the cops, he hits the switch early. We lose. She reached out and ended the call. The silence in the basement office was heavy, broken only by the loud hum of the server racks behind us. I looked at the digital clock on the bottom right corner of Sterling's monitor. 2:04 p.m. 56 minutes. Okay, Sterling said, breaking the silence. silence, he ran both hands over his face, pressing his palms into his eyes. Okay, we can't get the LLC records. The legal route is dead. So we're done, Mom said, her voice hollow. No, Sterling said. He dropped his hands and looked at his main monitor, the script altering the logs at 3 o'clock. It has to be running on a machine that hasn't been bricked by the primary wipe. When the network went down an hour ago, it locked up every standard terminal. The only machines still operational on the internal intranet are the administrative nodes. Carter's machine, Principal Miller's machine, and Terminal 01, I said, my heart jumping into my throat. Mrs. Gable's computer. Exactly, Sterling said, typing furiously again. Gable paid Carter to do the heavy lifting, but Carter is a coward. He wouldn't host the dead man's switch on his own machine. He'd put it on hers, or she demanded it be on hers, so she had control. Can you remote in and shut it down? Mom asked, stepping closer to the desk. No, the network is completely dark from the outside. I have zero remote access. Sterling stood up, grabbing a heavy ring of keys from his desk drawer. He shoved them into his pocket. I have to physically pull the hard drive out of Terminal 01. I stared at him. You mean go back to the school? We have to go to the guidance center, walk into Gable's office, and physically dismantle her computer before 3 p.m. Sterling, she's sitting right there, Mom pointed out. It's the middle of the school day. You think the librarian who just orchestrated a felony wire fraud ring is going to let you walk in and take her computer apart? I don't know, Sterling said grimly, but it's that, or Hannah goes to prison. He slammed his laptop shut, shoved it into the Pelican case, and locked it. Let's go. We ran up the concrete stairs of the annex building and piled back into the cars. I rode with Mom. She didn't bother using her turn signals. She blew through a yellow light that was definitely red by the time we crossed the intersection, her knuckles white on the steering wheel. Mom, I said, gripping the handle above the passenger door. What happens if Gable screams? What happens if she calls security? Let her call security, Mom said, her jaw set. If security comes, the police come. If the police come, it all blows up. But if Sterling has that hard drive in his hands when they get there, we have leverage. We just need him to get the drive. We pulled into the visitor parking lot of Westbridge High at 2:18 p.m. The school looked completely normal from the outside. The red brick, the large glass windows, the manicured lawn, but I knew the inside was in total chaos. With the network down, nothing was working. We met Sterling at the front doors. The main office is going to be a madhouse, Sterling said quietly as we pushed through the heavy double doors. Teachers can't log attendance. The VoIP phones are dead, and the bells are glitching. Keep your heads down. He wasn't wrong. The main lobby was packed. At least 20 teachers were crowded around the reception desk, complaining to Mrs. Higgins, who looked like she was on the verge of a breakdown. The principal's door was shut, and I could hear Miller yelling at someone through the frosted glass. Nobody looked twice at us. We were just part of the background panic. We slipped past the front desk and headed down the D-wing corridor toward the media center. The guidance offices were connected to the back of the library. Wait, I said, stopping abruptly as we rounded the corner. The heavy oak doors to the library were shut. A handwritten sign was taped over the glass. Network outage. Library closed until further notice. She locked it, Mom whispered. Sterling didn't hesitate. He pulled out the heavy ring of keys, found a square brass one, and slid it into the lock. It clicked loudly. He pushed the door open, and we slipped inside, letting it shut softly behind us. The library was dark. The overhead fluorescents were off, leaving only the pale gray afternoon light filtering in through the tall windows. The silence was heavy, thick with the smell of old paper and dust. We moved quietly past the circulation desk and through the maze of towering bookshelves. Workstation 14. The terminal I had used this morning was wrapped in bright yellow police tape. Seeing it made my stomach twist into a painful knot. The guidance suite is through there, I whispered, pointing to a door at the far end of the room. We crept toward it. Sterling reached out and turned the knob. It was unlocked. He pushed it open. The guidance suite was a long room with 4 separate cubicles and one enclosed office at the very back, Mrs. Gable's office. The door was cracked open about 2 inches, and a sliver of light was spilling out onto the carpet. We could hear the faint, rapid clicking of a keyboard. Sterling looked at my mom, held up a hand to tell us to wait, and stepped quietly into the suite. He moved toward the cracked door. He didn't knock. He just pushed it open the rest of the way and walked in. Mom and I moved up to the doorway to look inside. Mrs. Gable was sitting behind her desk. She wasn't wearing her usual friendly, soft-spoken librarian expression. Her face was tight, her eyes locked on the monitor, her fingers flying across the keys. She jumped violently when Sterling walked in, her hand flying to her chest. "Sterling!" she gasped, her voice shrill. "What on earth are you doing? You can't just barge in here." "Step away from the terminal, Eleanor," Sterling said. It was the exact same thing Carter had said to me this morning. Mrs. Gable blinked, recovering her composure with terrifying speed. She stood up, smoothing the front of her cardigan. "I beg your pardon? The network is down. I am trying to manually recover the senior scholarship files. You need to leave my office." "I know what you're doing," Sterling said, walking slowly around the edge of her desk. "And I know what Carter did. I know about the Nevada LLC. I know about the $12,000. Mrs. Gable froze. Her eyes darted from Sterling to the doorway, where she finally noticed Mom and me standing there. Her expression didn't change to guilt. It changed to absolute ice. "I don't know what you're talking about," she said smoothly. She reached down and slammed her laptop shut. "But I am calling security." "Call them," Mom said, stepping into the room. "Tell them to bring Officer Davies. Tell her you need to explain why an out-of-state shell company registered to your personal P.O. box just wired $12,000 to a 17-year-old girl to frame her for a federal crime." Mrs. Gable stared at my mom. She didn't reach for her desk phone. "Hannah," Mrs. Gable said, looking at me with a patronizing, disappointed smile. "Did you really drag your poor mother into this? After everything you've done today?" "Shut your mouth," Mom said, her voice barely above a whisper, but it carried so much venom that Mrs. Gable actually took a step back. "You don't get to speak to her. Step away from the computer." Sterling didn't wait for permission. He shoved past Mrs. Gable's chair, dropped to his knees under the desk, and grabbed the heavy black tower PC. "Hey," Mrs. Gable yelled, finally losing her cool. "Get your hands off that. That is district property." She lunged forward, grabbing grabbing Sterling's shoulder. Mom moved faster than I thought possible. She grabbed Mrs. Gable by the arm and yanked her backward, pinning her against the wall of the small office. "Touch him again," Mom hissed, right in Gable's face, "and I will break your arm before security gets through that door." Mrs. Gable breathed heavily, her eyes wide with shock. "You're insane. You are all going to jail." Under the desk, Sterling grunted. I heard the sound of plastic snapping, followed by the metallic screech of a casing being torn open. I looked at the clock on the wall. 2:41 p.m. 19 minutes. "Got it," Sterling panted. He pulled himself out from under the desk, clutching a rectangular silver hard drive in his hands. Wires were still dangling from the back of it, where he had ripped it out without properly disconnecting the SATA cables. He stood up, holding it like a trophy. "The script is dead," he said, looking at Mrs. Gable. "The 3 p.m. trigger won't execute. The logs aren't going to the police. Hannah is clear." Mrs. Gable looked at the drive in Sterling's hands. She didn't look defeated. She just smiled. It was a cold, horrible smile that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. "You think that's the only copy of the script?" she asked softly. Sterling froze. "Carter isn't as stupid as you think he is," Gable said, her voice dripping with condescension. "You really think he'd host the failsafe on a machine sitting in the middle of a public school? He hosted it on a remote server. My terminal was just an access node." "You're lying," Sterling said, but his voice lacked conviction. He looked down at the hard drive in his hands. "Am I?" Gable asked. She looked at the clock. 18 minutes until the logs are sent. 18 minutes until the police get a neat packaged file showing Hannah Hayes bypassing the firewall, accompanied by a sudden, unexplained deposit of $12,000 in her checking account. She pushed herself off the wall, brushing her sleeve where my mom had grabbed her. "You should have taken the deal on the phone, Hannah," she said, looking right at me. "I was trying to be generous. I gave you the money to make it look real, yes, but also to compensate you. You could have paid for college. Now, you're just going to prison broke. We can prove the LLC is yours," Mom said, but she sounded desperate now. "Can you?" Gable asked. "Because the registered agent is a blind trust. The P.O. box was opened under a stolen identity. By the time your cheap lawyer gets a subpoena, the LLC will be dissolved, the accounts will be closed, and I will be sitting here, a victim of a terrible cyber attack." Sterling looked frantic. He dropped the hard drive onto the desk and pulled out his phone. "I'm calling the police, right now. We bring them in, we show them everything we have." "And what do you have?" Gable asked, spreading her hands. "A drive with my librarian aide on camera? Zoe is a troubled girl. She acted alone. Or she acted with Hannah. Either way, I had nothing to do with it." "Go ahead, Sterling. Call them." Sterling hesitated, his thumb hovering over the screen. A noise came from the doorway behind us. She didn't act alone. We all spun around. Standing in the doorway of the office, holding a stack of returned library books, was Zoe. She looked terrible. Her makeup was smeared under her eyes, her hair was a mess, and she was shaking so badly the books in her hands were rattling against each other. "Zoe," Mrs. Gable said, her voice instantly dropping into a soothing, authoritative tone. "Go back to the front desk. This doesn't concern you." "It does," Zoe said, her voice cracking. She stepped into the room. She didn't look at Mrs. Gable. She looked at me. "Hannah, I'm so sorry," she whispered, tears spilling over her cheeks. "I didn't want to do it. She told me to do it." "Zoe, stop talking," Gable commanded sharply. Zoe ignored her. She walked further into the room, dropping the stack of books onto a small side table. They hit with a heavy thud. "My parents were going to kill me," Zoe sobbed, looking at my mom now, pleading for understanding. "I failed AP Chem. I failed calculus. My GPA dropped to a 2.4. My dad said if I didn't get into Oregon State, he was cutting me off entirely. No tuition, no car, nothing." "So you ruined my daughter's life?" Mom asked, her voice trembling with a rage so pure it was terrifying. "I didn't know they were going to use Hannah," Zoe cried, shrinking back. "Mrs. Gable approached me in February. She said there was a way to fix my transcript, but she said it would cost money. $15,000. My parents didn't have that kind of cash lying around for a bribe." Zoe wiped her nose with the back of her sleeve, sniffing hard. "She said I could work it off," Zoe continued. "She said I could be the collector. I had to approach the other kids, the ones whose parents had money. I had to pitch them the idea. I gathered the cash. I brought it to her." "You little fool," Gable hissed, her carefully constructed facade finally cracking. "Shut your mouth right now." "No!" Zoe yelled back, surprising all of us. She turned to Gable, her face red and blotchy. "You told me I just had to plug a flash drive into the staff computer this morning. You said it was just a routine update so Carter could clear the system. You didn't tell me you were framing Hannah. You didn't tell me Carter was going to lock her in a room with the police. You sent me those texts," I said, my voice dead and flat. "You sat next to me in the cafeteria, and you sent me texts threatening to show the police our Venmo history to make me look guilty." Zoe looked at me, her face crumbling. "She made me. When the police grabbed you, Mrs. Gable pulled me into the stacks. She said if I didn't create a fake paper trail implicating you, Carter would reverse my grades back to failing, and she would tell the police I was the mastermind. I was terrified, Hannah. I just did what she told me." "It's a very touching story," Gable said coldly, "but it's the word of a failing student against a tenured faculty member. Who do you think the police will believe? The girl caught on camera plugging in the drive or me? They'll believe me," Zoe said, reaching into the pocket of her jeans. She pulled out her cell phone. The screen was lit up. It was a voice recording app. The timer in the center of the screen was ticking upward. It was at 4 minutes and 12 seconds. "Because I didn't come in here to return books," Zoe said, her hand shaking as she held the phone up. "I came in here because I couldn't handle it anymore. I hit record before I walked through the door. I got everything you just said. About the Nevada LLC. About paying Hannah $12,000 to frame her. About Carter's remote server." Gable stared at the phone. For a second, the room was so quiet I could hear the faint hum of the air conditioning unit kicking on in the ceiling. Then Gable lunged. She wasn't aiming for the phone. She aimed for Zoe's throat. She slammed into Zoe, driving her backward into the doorway. Zoe screamed, dropping the phone. It hit the carpet with a soft thud, sliding away from them. Mom didn't hesitate. She grabbed Gable by the collar of her cardigan and the back of her hair, yanking her off Zoe with brutal force. Gable shrieked, flailing her arms, one of her nails catching Mom's cheek and drawing a thin line of blood. Mom didn't even flinch. She shoved Gable hard against the heavy wooden desk. Gable hit it with her hip, crying out in pain, and crumpled to the floor. Sterling dove for the phone. He snatched it off the carpet and scrambled backward. I got it, he breathed, staring at the screen. He hit the red stop button. I have the file. Zoe was sobbing hysterically against the wall, sliding down until she was sitting on the floor, her knees pulled to her chest. Gable was on the floor rubbing her hip, her face twisted in pure hatred. She looked up at my mom, breathing heavily. It doesn't matter, Gable spat. She pointed a shaking finger at the clock. 2:51 p.m. 9 minutes. You can't stop the logs from sending. Once they go out, the police system automates the warrant. The recording won't stop the arrest. It'll just take months for a lawyer to untangle it. Sterling, I said, looking at him, the remote server. Can you stop it? Sterling shook his head, his face pale. If it's hosted off-site, I have no idea what the IP address is. I can't hack a server I can't find. I know where it is. Zoe choked out from the floor. We all looked at her. What? Sterling asked, rushing over and kneeling next to her. Zoe, what do you mean? Carter, she sobbed, wiping her face. He didn't trust Gable. He told me if things went wrong, he had a physical backup, a secondary trigger. Where? Mom demanded. His car, Zoe cried. He has a mobile hotspot rig in his trunk. He runs his personal stuff off it so the district can't track his browsing. The script is hosted on a Raspberry Pi plugged into the battery in his trunk. He bragged about it to me when I was dropping off the cash. Carter's car, Sterling repeated, standing up. What does he drive? A blue Honda Civic, I said immediately. It has a cracked taillight. He parks in the staff lot near the dumpsters. 2:53, Sterling said, sprinting for the door. 7 minutes. Mom looked down at Gable, who was still sitting on the floor, looking completely stunned that her perfect plan was collapsing. You stay right there, Mom said softly. She turned to Zoe. Watch her. If she moves, scream. Mom grabbed my hand and we ran. We chased Sterling through the library, bursting out into the main hallway. The bell hadn't rung yet, so the corridors were mostly empty, but a few teachers poked their heads out of their classrooms as we sprinted past. We didn't stop. We hit the double doors at the end of the D-wing, slamming the crash bars, and burst out into the staff parking lot. The Portland air was crisp and cold. Spread out, Sterling yelled, pointing down the rows of cars. Look for the blue Civic. I ran down the first aisle, my eyes darting frantically over the bumpers. Toyota, Ford, Subaru, Nissan. No blue Honda. 2:55, Mom shouted from the next row over. I cut across the asphalt, weaving between cars. I headed toward the back of the lot, near the massive green industrial dumpsters. There, tucked into a spot right next to the brick wall of the cafeteria, mostly hidden from view, a faded blue Honda Civic. I ran around to the back. The right taillight was shattered, covered with red translucent tape. Here, I screamed at the top of my lungs. Over here. Sterling and Mom came sprinting around the corner of the dumpsters. Sterling didn't even slow down. He hit the trunk of the Civic, trying to pry it open with his bare hands. It was locked tight. We need the keys, Mom yelled. Where is Carter? He's probably hiding in the server room in the basement, Sterling said, panting heavily. We don't have time to find him. 2:57, I whispered, staring at the trunk. 3 minutes. Sterling backed up. He looked around wildly. He grabbed a heavy, fist-sized rock from the landscaping bed next to the brick wall. Stand back, he ordered. He didn't aim for the trunk. He aimed for the rear passenger window. He wound up and slammed the rock into the glass. It didn't break. It just bounced off with a dull thud. Damn it, he swore, his hand bleeding. Let me, Mom said. She pushed him aside, reached into her purse, and pulled out a heavy metal tire pressure gauge. She wrapped her fist around it, leaving the solid metal tip protruding between her knuckles. She slammed it into the corner of the window. The tempered glass shattered instantly, exploding inward in a shower of tiny cubes. Sterling reached through the broken window, unlocking the back door and pulling it open. He climbed halfway into the back seat, reaching over the seats to try and access the trunk release latch. It's locked out, he yelled, his voice muffled. He disabled the internal release. 2:58, I screamed, feeling genuine panic clawing at my throat. 2 minutes, Sterling. It's going to send. Sterling backed out of the car. He looked at the trunk, then at the rock on the ground. We can't get in, he said, his voice dropping into defeat. It's a steel trunk lid. Without the keys or a crowbar, we can't open it. I stared at the blue metal of the trunk. Inside that dark space, a tiny computer was counting down the seconds until it ruined my life. It was sitting there, connected to a battery, connected to a hotspot. Wait, I said, my brain flashing back to what Zoe had said. He has a mobile hotspot rig, runs off a battery in his trunk. Sterling, I yelled, grabbing his arm. A hotspot. It needs cell service, right? Yes, Sterling said, confused. But if it doesn't have a signal, it can't send the logs. I pointed at the sky, then at the dumpsters. Block the signal. Cover the car. Sterling's eyes went wide. He looked at the brick wall, then at the Civic. A Faraday cage. We need to block the RF transmission. With what? Mom asked frantically. We don't have lead blankets. Tin foil, Sterling yelled. The cafeteria. The kitchens have massive rolls of aluminum foil. Mom didn't wait. She turned and sprinted toward the heavy metal door that led to the back of the school kitchens. She grabbed the handle and yanked. It was locked. Sterling! Keys! She screamed. Sterling threw the heavy ring of master keys across the asphalt. Mom caught them perfectly, fumbled for a second, found the master key, and shoved it into the lock. She threw the door open and disappeared inside. 2:59, I yelled, staring at my phone screen. 1 minute. Seconds ticked by. My heart was beating so fast I could feel it in my teeth. 50 seconds. 40 seconds. The metal door banged open. Mom came flying out, carrying 2 massive, industrial-sized rolls of heavy-duty aluminum foil. She threw one to Sterling and kept the other. Cover the trunk, Sterling yelled. They attacked the car. Mom ripped a 10-foot sheet of foil and threw it over the back windshield and the trunk lid. Sterling grabbed it, smoothing it down over the metal, pressing it tightly against the edges to seal any gaps. 30 seconds. They unrolled more, wrapping the back half of the car like a leftover baked potato. The foil crinkled and tore, but they just layered it thicker, pressing it down into the seams of the trunk, covering the bumper, wrapping the wheel wells. More! Sterling yelled. If there's a gap, the signal gets out. 15 seconds. I grabbed the end of the roll from Mom and ran around the back, pulling the foil tight across the rear bumper, sealing it under the chassis. My hands were shaking so badly I tore it, but I just grabbed more and slapped it over the hole. 10 seconds. 9, 8. Hold it down! Sterling commanded, pressing his entire body weight against the foil covering the trunk lid. Mom did the same on the other side. I pressed my hands flat against the back bumper. 3, 2, 1. Then, 3 p.m., we stood there, pressed against the ridiculous, shiny silver car, breathing heavily in the cold air. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. I looked at my phone in my left hand. 3:1 p.m. Did it work? I whispered. Sterling didn't move. I don't know. If the foil blocked the cellular signal, the script tried to execute, failed to connect to the external server, and timed out. But if a sliver of signal got through, he slowly let go of the trunk and stepped back. He pulled his phone out of his pocket and unlocked it. He opened his email, refreshing his inbox. The loading circle spun and disappeared. No new emails, Sterling said. His voice was shaking. He opened his network diagnostic app, the one he had synced to the school's emergency alert system. He refreshed it. Nothing, he breathed. The firewall hasn't logged an outbound data dump. The police server hasn't been pinged. He looked at me, a massive, exhausted grin breaking across his face. It timed out. The logs didn't send. I dropped the torn roll of foil onto the asphalt and leaned against the brick wall of the cafeteria. My legs felt like they were made of water. I slid down until I was sitting on the cold ground, burying my face in my hands. Mom walked over and knelt beside me. She didn't say anything. She just pulled me into a tight hug, burying her face in my hair. I could feel her shaking. Okay, Sterling said, letting out a long, ragged breath. He looked at the shattered window, the foil-wrapped trunk, and then back toward the school doors. Okay, we have the recording. We have the stopped payload. Now, we go to the police. Before any of us could move, the heavy metal door to the kitchen banged open again. Officer Davies stood there. Her hand was resting firmly on her utility belt. She took one look at the shattered window, the foil on the car, and the three of us standing in the alleyway. I got a panic button alert from the guidance office, Officer Davies said, her voice completely devoid of warmth, and a 911 call from a teacher who saw someone smashing a car window in the staff lot. She unclipped her radio. Dispatch, I need backup at the rear cafeteria exit. I have 3 individuals here, 1 minor, 2 adults. Destruction of property. She let go of the radio and looked right at me. Hannah, Officer Davies said, put your hands where I can see them. I slowly raised my hands, my palms open and freezing in the crisp afternoon air. My phone was still clutched in my left hand, the screen dark. Mom stepped directly in front of me, putting her body between me and the police officer. She didn't do anything wrong, Mom said. Her voice was shaking, but not from fear. She was absolutely exhausted and running on pure, unfiltered adrenaline. We didn't break into that car to steal anything. We broke into it to stop a federal crime. Officer Davies didn't relax. She kept her hand resting on her belt. Step away from the vehicle, Mrs. Hayes. All 3 of you. Now. We shuffled backward. Sterling kept his hands raised at shoulder height. His knuckles were bleeding from where he'd hit the glass. Officer Davies, Sterling said, his chest heaving as he tried to catch his breath. I'm Sterling, the independent auditor. We met in the principal's office this morning. Davies narrowed her eyes at him. I know who you are. Why is there 20 feet of aluminum foil wrapped around Martin Carter's trunk? Because Carter is hosting a dead man switch on a mobile hotspot in there, Sterling explained rapidly, the tech jargon spilling out of him. At 3 p.m., it was programmed to permanently wipe the district servers and spoof Hannah's IP address to frame her for the entire grade tampering ring. The foil acted as a Faraday cage. It blocked the cellular signal so the script would time out. Davies looked at the ridiculous, shiny silver mess wrapped around the blue Civic. She looked back at us. She clearly thought we had all lost our minds. Carter didn't act alone, Sterling continued, taking a slow, deliberate step forward. He reached into his coat pocket. Davies instantly tensed. Slowly, she warned. Sterling pulled out Zoe's phone, holding it by the edges so Davies could see exactly what it was. Eleanor Gable is the mastermind, Sterling said. She set up a blind LLC in Nevada. She collected cash from desperate parents, took her cut, and paid Carter to alter the transcripts. When I started auditing the network, they panicked. They needed a scapegoat. They picked Hannah. He held the phone out toward her. Zoe is in Gable's office right now, he said. She just confessed to being the middleman, and I have a 4-minute audio recording on this phone of Eleanor Gable admitting to the entire thing. The wire fraud, the fake paper trail, and the $12,000 she deposited into Hannah's account to make her look guilty. Davies stared at the phone. The harsh, commanding edge in her posture shifted just a fraction. She was a cop, and she knew what a frantic, lying suspect looked like. But Sterling didn't look like he was lying. He looked like an IT guy who had just run a marathon. She walked forward and took the phone from his hand. Unlock it, she said. Sterling tapped the screen and hit play. We stood there in the freezing parking lot, the sound of distant traffic humming from the main road, and listened to the tinny, compressed audio coming out of the small speaker. Gable's voice was crystal clear. You think that's the only copy of the script? Davies' eyes flicked up to meet mine. I gave you the money to make it look real, yes, but also to compensate you. You could have paid for college. Now, you're just going to prison broke. The recording played all the way through to the sound of the scuffle, Zoe dropping the phone, and my mom slamming Gable into the desk. When it finished, the silence in the alleyway was absolute. Davies lowered the phone. She looked at the smashed window of the Civic. She looked at the blood on Sterling's hand. Then she looked at my mom, who still had a thin, angry red scratch down her cheek where Gable had clawed her. Davies unclipped her radio from her shoulder. Dispatch, this is Davies, she said, her voice completely calm, completely professional. Cancel the backup at the cafeteria. Reroute those units to the D-wing entrance. I need 2 officers to secure the guidance suite, and I need a tech team down here to process a vehicle in the staff lot. She let go of the button and let out a long exhale, her breath pluming white in the cold air. She looked at me. You can put your hands down, Hannah. My arms dropped to my sides. The relief hit me so hard my knees actually buckled. I stumbled, and Mom caught me, wrapping her arms around my shoulders and holding me tight against her side. Is it over? I whispered into her coat. It's over, Mom said quietly, pressing a kiss to the top of my head. The next 3 hours were a blur of fluorescent lights and official statements. We didn't go back to the principal's office. Davies took us straight to the precinct downtown. We sat in a quiet room with decent coffee while the police tore Westbridge High apart. They found Carter exactly where Sterling said he would be, hiding in the sub-basement server room, desperately trying to log into his remote hotspot. When the police walked in, he completely folded. He gave up the passwords to his trunk rig, confirming the script had timed out exactly at 3 p.m. when the foil blocked the signal. Gable was arrested in her office. She didn't scream or fight this time. When they put the handcuffs on her, she just stared straight ahead, her lips pressed into a thin, furious line. They walked her out through the main lobby, right as the 3:15 bell rang. Half the school watched the beloved librarian get put put into the back of a squad car. Zoe was brought to the precinct with her parents. I saw her briefly in the hallway. Her dad was yelling at a desk sergeant, his face purple with rage, while Zoe sat on a plastic bench looking completely destroyed. She looked up and saw me. She didn't say anything. She just mouthed the word, "Times, sorry." I didn't nod. I didn't smile. I just kept walking. She had done the right thing in the end, but she had still sold me out to save herself. I knew I would never be able to look at her the same way again. Some things you don't come back from. By 6:30 p.m., Uncle David finally arrived. He was furious that Mom had ignored his advice, but once he saw the police report and the transcript of the audio recording, his anger dissolved into a quiet, stunned respect. He sat next to me while I signed a sworn statement. He arranged for the $12,000 in my checking account to be frozen and transferred to a police evidence escrow account first thing in the morning. "You're fully cleared, Hannah," the detective told me, closing his manila folder. "The school board is dropping the expulsion. You can go back to class tomorrow." "I think I'll take tomorrow off," I said, my voice hoarse. We walked out of the precinct just as the sun was setting, painting the Portland sky in deep shades of bruised purple and gray. Sterling was standing on the sidewalk, waiting for an Uber. His hand was bandaged, and his cheap gray suit looked completely ruined. He looked up as we walked out. "Hey," he said, giving a tired half smile. "Hey," I said. Mom walked up to him. She didn't say a word. She just reached out and pulled him into a brief, fierce hug. Sterling looked surprised, awkwardly patting her on the back before she let go. "You saved her life today," Mom said firmly. "Thank you." "She saved her own life," Sterling said, pointing at me. "I was ready to hit that car with a rock until she remembered the foil. She's smart." He looked at me. "If you ever decide you want to learn how to actually code, let me know. You've got the right instincts." "I think I'll stick to history," I said, managing a real smile for the first time all day. Mom and I walked to the Subaru. She unlocked it, and we both climbed in. The car smelled like stale coffee and old receipts. It smelled like normal life. She put the keys in the ignition, but she didn't turn them right away. She just sat there, gripping the steering wheel, staring out at the darkening street. I reached into my pocket. My fingers brushed against the small, cold rectangle of metal. I pulled it out and looked at it. The silver Kingston flash drive, right on the edge, the tiny, jagged dent where Barnaby had bitten it. I set it gently in the center console cup holder. Mom looked at the drive, then looked at me. The tension that had been holding her together for the last 10 hours finally broke. A tear slipped down her cheek, and she let out a shaky, exhausted laugh. "I'm buying that cat a salmon tonight," she whispered. I didn't say anything. I just reached over and took her hand. She turned the key, put the car in drive, and took us home.